Marinero, the Sick podcast, and following Jesperi Kotkaniemi being offer sheeted by the Carolina Hurricanes and the Canadiens not matching because Kotkaniemi has not lived up to the potential that they saw in him when they drafted him. A lot of people are asking themselves the question whether or not the Canadiens draft badly or develop badly. Could be both. Is there one more than the other? I'll give you my opinion on this. It's a Sick podcast. The show is brought to you by Essentia, the world's only natural memory foam mattress. Go to myessentia.com/sickpod and use code SICKPOD for a free pillow with your purchase. Essentia, beyond organic sleep. Let's go back to where this all started, of course, because the first ever amateur draft in which Trevor Timmins was in charge of was back in 2003, which is one of the deepest drafts in the history of the National Hockey League. In that draft, Marc-Andre Fleury, Eric Stahl, Nathan Horton, Thomas Vanek, Ryan Suter, Jeff Carter, Dustin Brown, Brent Seabrook, Zach Parise, Ryan Getzlaff, Corey Perry, Mike Richards, Ryan Kessler, Brent Burns, Patrice Bergeron, and I'm probably forgetting many others, right? The list goes on and on. It was an incredibly deep draft. That year, the Canadiens drafted 10th overall, and they were looking for that number one centerman. Jeff Carter was in that draft. Patrice Bergeron was in that draft. Ryan Getzlaff was in that draft, and the Canadiens drafted winger Andre Kostitsyn, who at the time, a lot of people said should have been or could have been a top 5 player in the draft, but he slipped because he had a health condition. I believe it was epilepsy, and he was taking medication and stuff like that, and because of that, his stock dipped. The Canadiens had spoken with doctors who said that his situation, his condition would be under control, and to not worry about drafting him, so they drafted him. Unfortunately, the Canadiens didn't get off to a right start with Trevor Timmins' first pick in his tenure as a scout with the Montreal Canadiens, because once again, that was a very deep draft. Having said that, there have been other picks that have panned out. Now, the second year of that Kostitsyn draft, which had Maxime Lapierre, who ended up playing in the National Hockey League, had Ryan O'Byrne, who played in the National Hockey League, had Yaroslav Halak, 9th round, 271st pick, who's had a nice career in the National Hockey League. There was a hiccup with the first pick, and there was a hiccup with the second pick, because the second pick was Corey Urquhart, who played for the Montreal Rocket. I believe the Canadiens drafted him 40th, and Bergeron went 45th, and Bergeron, too, was in the Canadiens' backyard, playing in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. The year after, there were some hiccups, and there were some pretty good players. Kyle Chipchura was the 18th pick overall. Probably could have done better than that, with all due respect to him. Alexei Yemelin went in round number 3. Mikhail Grabowski went in round number 5. Greg Stewart was chosen in the 8th round. Mark Streit, a 9th round pick for a guy who played, 800 games in the National Hockey League. That was a great pick. I'm going to rattle off now some first round picks the Canadiens have had since then. Carey Price, David Fisher, Ryan McDonough and Max Pacioretty, Louis LeBlanc, Jared Tenorti, Nathan Beaulieu, Alex Galchenyuk, Michael McCarron, Nikita Sherbak, Noah Juleson, Mikhail Sergachev, Ryan Poehling, and Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Cole Caulfield, Caden Gooley, and of course, Logan Mailloux. The Canadiens have seen some first-round picks pan out. They've seen many first-round picks not pan out. Who didn't pan out? David Fisher didn't play in the National Hockey League. Mike McCarron didn't play very long, doesn't have the foot speed. Jared Tenorti still plays in the NHL, but doesn't have the foot speed. Noah Juleson, unfortunately, was a victim of a very bad injury. That's obviously not something you can predict. Alex Galchenyuk is still playing in the National Hockey League, but he's had an up and down career, and safe to say that he didn't play to the potential that a lot of people, especially the Canadians, saw in him. Nathan Beaulieu is a depth defenseman. Louis LeBlanc played 50 games in the NHL. Danny Cristo never played. Ryan McDonough and Max Pacioretty obviously have and are real good players in the league. And of course, what can I say about Carey Price? The draft, it's not an easy thing. I'm not going to say this to void Trevor Timmons, the assistant general manager who oversees the draft, of any responsibility. It's a fact. You talk to anybody in hockey and, you ask them to project on a player and what that player is going to be 3, 5, 8 years down the line. It's very, very difficult to project. Not an exact science. It's probably the hardest job in hockey. So we'll take a look at some singles, some doubles, some triples, and some home runs in a second. In the meantime, I tell you that if any of those Montreal Canadiens players are playing for other teams right now and you want to buy their jerseys because you're a fan of that player, you can go to sportbuffshop.com for all of your officially licensed sports apparel. And even for our sick merch, use code SICK15 for 15% off on all of their items. Take a look at, for the most part, when the Canadians dropped the ball with their drafting. Louis LeBlanc. Say whatever you want. They succumbed to media pressure and fan pressure and drafted the local kid. Mind you, it wasn't a great draft either, but that draft is not held in Montreal. I'm not so sure they're picking Louis LeBlanc. Maybe they are, but with everyone in the stands chanting Louis, 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 they kind of felt like they had to, because if not, they weren't going to make it out alive at the end of the night. Jarred Tinordi, they wanted to get bigger on defense. But as they were drafting him, the league was transitioning to foot speed, and he didn't have any of it. They drafted by position. Michael McCarron, the same exact thing, but this time a forward and not a defenseman. They drafted by position. A big guy who can play center and play wing, who's going to make their team bigger. They drafted him for all the wrong reasons. Alex Galchenyuk. That was the year they could have drafted Morgan Riley. They could have drafted Philip Forsberg. They could have even drafted Thomas Hertl. Those three players, better players in the National Hockey League than Alex Galchenyuk. But they didn't look at Forsberg. They didn't look at Riley. They looked at centers. And the guy that was number one on their list in terms of potential was Galchenyuk. Once again, they drafted by need, and they drafted by position. They got it wrong. Look, I understand that if you're in your organization you don't have players that play a certain position and they're hard to acquire that position, you have to go out and draft them. But one executive told me all teams do take some picks by position, but it should be a rule of thumb in your organization to never let it happen in your first 2 rounds. In your first 2 rounds, do not draft by need. Do not draft by position. Draft the best player available. And even the year that the Canadians drafted Carey Price, they had a bunch of goalies in their organization. I believe they had Cristobal Huet. I believe they had Jose Theodore. I believe they had Matthew Garon, Jan Danis. The list goes on and on. They had depth now. Garon and Danis couldn't be number ones, but Jose Theodore obviously was, and Cristobal Huet for a short period of time. The Canadians drafted Price because, in their opinion, he was the best player available. When they drafted McDonough, he was the best player available. When they drafted Pacioretty, they were drafting the best player available. When they drafted Sergachev, they drafted who they thought was the best player available. And so when the Canadians draft the best player available, they do well. When they draft by position or need, or what the fans want because they're chanting Louis, Louis, they get it wrong. Maybe they should just sit back before their pick and take a drink and relax the way I'm going to do it right now with Cherry River Hard Seltzer, only 90 calories, natural flavors, no preservatives. Now available in Quebec grocery stores and at the beer store. Let me take a sip. Hits a spot every time. All right, so the big question now is, with so many first-round picks not panning out, do the Canadiens have a draft problem? Well, if they had a draft problem, they wouldn't only have it in the first round. They'd have it in the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth. And they wouldn't have a lot of players that would end up playing at the National Hockey League level. As it pans out, the Canadiens have had players that play at the National Hockey League level. Now, you got to keep in mind that any team will tell you 2-3 picks per draft year that end up playing in the league. They're happy with that. Kostitsyn played. Lapierre played. O'Byrne played. I'm not going to talk about guys who played under 50 games because it's like they didn't play. But Halak played. Chipchura played. Emelin played. Grabowski played. Mark Streit played. Ryan White played. Ryan McDonough played. So that's 10 right there. Max Pacioretty played. PK Subban played. Yannick Weber played. Had a real bad year in 08 where they had, I think, 5 picks and none of them played. Gabriel Dumont, 90 games. We'll count them. Jared Tenorti, 100. So now we're at 15. Brendan Gallagher and Nathan Beaulieu and Alex Galchenyuk and Charles Hudon and Jacob De La Rose. I believe we're at about 20. Arturi Lehkonen and Sven Andrighetto. Jake Evans. Juleson unfortunately got hurt. Sergachev. Victor Mete. We're probably at 25. Fleury's going to have a long career ahead of him. Paling's going to play in the National Hockey League. I'm convinced that Caden Primo will as well. Josh Brook. Look, and, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Alexander Romanov. I think Jordan Harris is going to play in the National Hockey League. I think Jesse Ulonen's going to play in the National Hockey League. Cole Caulfield's already there. I believe Norlinder will play in the National Hockey League. I believe Struble will play in the National Hockey League. This, of course, barring injuries and if everyone's healthy. Caden Gooley is a can't miss in the National Hockey League. Luke Tuck's going to play in the National Hockey League. So I say this. The Canadiens can draft players that play in the NHL. And they did have some home runs. No one talks about them because some of them are no longer here. Ryan McDonough at 12th is a home run. Max Pacioretty at 22nd is a home run. PK Subban at 43 is a home run. Cole Caulfield at 15 is a home run. Sergachev at 9th is a home run. They've hit home runs. Price at 5 was a home run. How about Brendan Gallagher at 147th overall? He's a home run. It's just that some of those home runs have been traded. It's not Trevor Timmins' fault that Sergachev was traded. It's not Trevor Timmins' fault that McDonough was traded. It's not Trevor Timmins' fault that Subban was traded. But some of those players that he drafted, they traded them. They were able to go out and get some really good players for them. Some trades worked out. Some trades didn't work out. And in cases like trading Galchenyuk for Max Domi, and Max Domi comes in the first season, scores in his mid-20s, and picks up 72 points, well, at that point, Canadiens fans are celebrating. And if you want to celebrate and have a big party, you call Sophistication Event Rentals, live music, DJs, sound systems, tents, chairs, tables, decor, lighting, photo booth. TV screens, call them 514-570-5770. The players that they drafted by position or by need, or because the fans really wanted them, those players weren't ready to play in the National Hockey League right away. But because they needed those players, because of position or need, or they drafted them because the fans wanted them, they had those players play right away. And when those players played right away, we realized a couple of years down the line that even though they may have had a good season or two, that these players were rushed. Alex Galchenyuk was rushed to the Montreal Canadiens because they needed a centerman and the cupboards were pretty much empty down on the farm. The same thing for Jesperi Kotkaniemi. The same thing for so many players. The second they rush those players, you take a look back. For Kotkaniemi's development, 2 more years in Finland and a year in Laval, or at the very least, 2 years in Finland. That's exactly what he would have needed. Galchenyuk had to play more before getting the call up. So, the drafting is not perfect, but it's not as bad as a lot of people think it is. Yes, there's been some bad moves, but I think most of them are explained by succumbing to fan pressure, which could have been an organizational thing, selecting players by position or need, want, which could have been an organizational thing. Now, maybe Trevor Timmins was told, you absolutely have to get me a centerman. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he felt the pressure to go out and get one. So I think all things being equal, when you take a look at the body of work, if I had to choose one where the Canadiens struggle more, I would say that the Canadiens struggle more with their draft, with their developing, than their drafting. Because there have been some great draft picks. Some of them still here, some of them not here. I think it's more a development issue. And I think a lot of that has to do with the cupboards being bare once upon a time. And a lot of that has to do with the pressure that goes to being in Montreal and that you have to make the playoffs right away. And so if a player is better than another player, you'll think of putting that player on your team for the good of the team, but that's not for the good of the player. That's at the detriment of the player. So wrapping it up, do they have a bigger problem drafting or do they have a bigger problem developing? Marinaro says, if I had to choose one of the two, I would say they have a bigger problem developing than they do drafting. Who's going to be the rookie of the year in the National Hockey League for the 2021-2022 season? You can bet on it on MyBookie. Go to mybookie.ag/the Sick Podcast and use code SickPicks to double your deposit. Bet, win, get paid. You can put some money on Cole Caulfield. And if Cole Caulfield ends up winning the rookie of the year after being drafted in the first round, 15th overall, then you're probably going to agree with me that it's more of a development than a drafting, because that would have been a pretty good draft pick. Cole Caulfield didn't need more development. He was ready. The players that aren't are the players that need more development. And in most cases, like I just showed you, that's when they didn't draft the best player available. That's when they ended up drafting by position, want, need, or fan pressure. I'm Marinaro, and I hope you enjoyed the Sick Podcast. Cheers.